Hello there, this is Pilgrim. Welcome to the first installation of Road Trips. This series will be covering my first road trip to France, during which I attempted to explore the southeastern part of the country in early 2024, from March the 10th to March the 21st to be exact. As you might have been able to tell from the speedy intro, this series is not supposed to go into detail, but to give you a rough overview of my trip and, naturally, the area I visited. If you want me to go into further detail or have any suggestions, questions or advice, please let me know in the comments. So much for that. Let's get started with day 1 and Besançon. Besançon was a comfortable starting point for my trip. It is fairly close, just 2 hours away, 1 hour past Belfort only. As you can see, it is not too large of a city, but believe it or not, this is actually pretty much the sweet spot for me as far as size is concerned. If you happen to travel by car, which of course I do, cities of this size are much more approachable, easier to navigate and explore and, in many cases, very beautiful, yet hardly known. The position of the old town is fairly easy to spot, even at first glance. Old towns can usually be identified by their higher density of buildings and the fact that they are basically encircled by railroad and major traffic lines. In this case, the circumstance that it also lies on sort of a peninsula makes it even easier. The reason for this location seems obvious. Surrounded by river on 3 sides and by a hill on the 4th, this makes for a very defensible position. If you look closer, you can already see that on top of the hill to the south, a citadel has been erected. The hills beyond the river, west and east, or left and right from your perspective, also house fortifications as well. Therefore, not unlike Belfort, Besançon used to be very well defended, which makes a lot of sense. We are just on the other side of the Belfort Gap after all. With that being said, let's leave the map and dive right in. I started way outside town, with this little shrine being one of the first things I saw. That was purely by accident though. I was looking for something else entirely, which happened to be close by. This actually. If you can't spot it, I don't blame you. I needed to search for it myself, as it is somewhat difficult to find. Here we are. Looks just like a small hole in the ground, doesn't it? Well, it isn't. If you know what to look for, you can see that this isn't actually rock but masonry, even if it is fairly degraded and overgrown. Considering its age, its current state is not surprising. This is, as a matter of fact, part of a Roman water main which used to supply ancient Besançon. My next stop was this memorial site. As far as I know, it concerns events of the Second World War. There's also an inside part, but it was not open when I was there. I guess I was too early, either in the day or the year. This is also where I came across my first weird moment. Fire extinguisher in a tree. There's an interesting story to it, I'm sure. However, despite the fact that the memorial was closed, it still was worth visiting, for it offered a great view of the town. Here you can see the citadel, part of Old Town, as well as the forts on the hills flanking it. Moving ever closer, I paid this small church a visit. A target of opportunity, essentially, for it happened to be located at a road I took anyway. It was still early, and I had it all to myself. Neat little location with some nice, albeit modern, stained glass windows. My next stop was out in the open again, the remains of a Roman road. My first actually, at least the first that was still somewhat recognizable. An interesting experience for sure. Believe it or not, but there was still one more site I wanted to visit, before finally moving on to the town itself. This one also came with a great view, even better than before, since I was way closer now. The same hold up for one of the forts on the opposite side. It's not easy to spot because of its low profile, except of course, if you already know about it. The location I wanted to visit was on the side of a cliff. But don't worry, I did not need to do any climbing. Although somewhat adventurous, tight and rocky in places, this was an actual path, railing included. It was this cave that I wanted to see up close. It's a bat cave, no less. You can see the opening at the ceiling, allowing the bats to come and go as they please. Unfortunately, that did not apply to me, as I found the cave locked. Reason unknown. There was a note, but I never bothered to translate it. I just accepted it, took a small peek inside and moved on. Such is the nature of trips like this. You have to go with the flow. So here we finally are, one of the gates accessing the city. If you have been paying attention, you will notice that this tower was actually visible from in front of the Bat Cave. It makes for a fun entry point, that's for sure. I love the medieval look of it. This, of course, is the front side. Here you can see the back. Moving along on the road below one of the flanks of the citadel, you can see that most houses seem to have been built utilizing the same kind of rock used for the citadel itself. An indication for the regional geology and, possibly, time of construction. Just a little bit further I came across this. A tunnel. It is somewhat hidden by the bridge. The sign to the right reads Tunnel de la Citadelle. Construction 1878 until 1882. Length 388 meters. Naturally I had to take a closer look. Of course tunnels like this are not too rare, but they don't usually come with a waterway attached, which makes this one a bit peculiar. Entering it, I was thrilled to find out that it goes all the way through to the other side. Here's a short clip so you can get a better impression. Just keep in mind that this is one of my very early ones, not intended for publication.
Okay, so turns out this thing goes actually all the way through. Did not expect that.
I also came across a poster with this aerial view of Old Town, which gives you a fairly good understanding of the place. It is taken from the opposite side of our approach. Our current position on it would be at the top, roughly in the middle, just left of the citadel. Our further way leading down and to the right. Moving on, I passed this battery tower. Yes, those are gun ports. Followed by the city gate. I came across quite a number of old buildings, and it was really nice to see most of them, like this one, still being used, as opposed to those being left standing simply as a tourist site. After taking a short look on my map, I decided for this direction. It sure looked promising to me. Bullseye, as the Americans say. Exactly what I wanted to see. I went for this door, the sign on the inside encouraging me. The door you can see to the right leads to the astronomical clock, by the way. But since I was traveling ahead of tourist season, it wasn't open for visitation yet. Now all there was left to do was to move down a couple of stairs, and there I was. Besançon Cathedral. You might find this view to be underwhelming, but let me show you how it looked like remaining in the very same spot, just turning 90 degrees to the right. Much better, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I felt at home at once. Looking down the aisle into the other direction, you can immediately see an area that has been sealed off due to renovation, a most common sight in churches of this age. Indeed, you could count yourself lucky if you ever managed to find one where this wasn't the case, to at least some degree. One other thing that Besançon Cathedral has in common with most of its sisters is the fact that it is highly fragmented. Even more so than usual in this case, as many of the chapels attached have their own very distinct style, like this one. Despite not undergoing renovation at the moment, this next one is closed up anyway. But even with the picture distorted by the glass, you can clearly see that it looks nothing like the one I showed you before. The main altar bears further witness to the high level of fragmentation in styles. While the pillars of the aisle, as well as the lower level of the apse, is Romanesque, the upper level is Gothic. Gothic classique, by the looks of it. On top of that, the cathedral is not only not oriented eastwards, like medieval churches usually are, it also features an apse on either end of the structure, with both sides featuring altars, even if this one is notably less prominent. All in all, Besançon gives the impression of a very charming, very interesting, yet somewhat confused cathedral. A collection or conglomeration from different time periods that defy unification more successful than this is the case in other churches of this age. You could call it a box of chocolates if you wanted to. Sticking to that theme, the main entrance is located at the side, the door I used to enter being to the left-hand side of it. Leaving the cathedral, I did not need to go far, as the next site I wanted to see was right next to it. In fact, I did not even need to take a single step. Turning on the spot was already enough to catch a glimpse of it. Would you like to guess what I am talking about? Take your time. Are you done? Alright, I'll show you, using yet another short clip.
Do you see that pillar? Looks Roman. Let's check. Yeah. There's another one. Okay, it is Roman.
Yes, it is indeed a Roman arch, heavily eroded unfortunately. But what do you expect? This structure is way over 1,000 years old. Closer to 2, probably. We are lucky it survived that long at all. Of course I knew it was there before I visited. What surprised me was its close proximity to the church. I had overestimated the distance. But as you can see on this picture, the main gate of Besançon Cathedral is just behind it. With this, my main objectives for the day were already reached. But of course there was still more that I wanted to see, which was a good thing too, since it was just 10 o'clock in the morning. Not that I needed to go all that far anyway. Like I said, as far as Besançon is concerned, it is more on the smaller side of cities. As a matter of fact, the next Roman ruins were just a couple of steps away. Here's a picture showing them a bit better. Also just a couple of steps away is this building. What is so special about that, you may ask? Well, have you ever heard the name Victor Hugo? He was a famous French writer and politician. He wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is where he was born, in Besançon, just 2 hours away from my place. Surprised? Well, it certainly came as a surprise to me when I learned about it. The world sure seems small sometimes. Here's a statue of him. This statue, however, is from a different part of town. I simply decided to show it to you now, because we were just talking about him. Besançon also has a number of museums, like this one. Most of them located in buildings that seem to have historic value themselves, which, of course, are the best kind. I did not visit any of them though, for I felt compelled to move on. Not that I do not value a good museum. But when I am on the road, I want to cover as much ground as possible and very much prefer to explore a living, breathing city to visiting a museum. There are just so many details to discover, like this one, for example. I do not know what purpose this building serves today, but it most certainly used to be a church prior. All in all, the old town is very charming and quite fun to visit. I hope these pictures help to bring that across. Here is another church I happened to find, but since there was a service taking place at the time, I held back somewhat and did not stay for very long. As far as this building was concerned, I do not recall what it was. It could very well be the Palace of Justice, but I'm just guessing here. Please keep that in mind. Here's another one I'm unsure about. I mean, there's obviously a cross on top of the dome, but that alone does not necessarily mean anything. Whatever its purpose may be, I certainly appreciate the aesthetics. Here's another famous Frenchman for you. Louis Pasteur. However, in this case there's no direct relation to him. As far as I'm aware, this institution was simply named after him as a gesture of admiration. This was where I crossed the river surrounding Old Town, therefore leaving it. Besançon's largest church is located just across. Naturally, it is a somewhat new building by comparison. I still wanted to take a look anyway. It's a quite substantial building, especially considering the size of the city. It is also where I came across this feline. I know you all like cat pictures. Well, here you go, my first French cat. There will be more later on this road trip, especially as we get down south. But for now, this one will have to do. Also roughly in the vicinity happened to be this house. Half-timbered buildings seem rare in Besançon, which is why I wanted to show you this one. Here's one of the defensive towers, as seen from across the river. If you go back to the poster showing the aerial view, you can actually spot it on there quite easily, since it stands somewhat isolated and for itself. I was now arriving at the main reason for crossing the river in the first place. Would you like to guess what this is? Here are a couple more pictures. Maybe that will help. It is very difficult to tell though, I have to admit that. What you're looking at is what is left of the Roman arena of ancient Besançon. There's not too much left, and yes, they turned it into a parking space. Not too far away I found ruins of a different kind, different in purpose and much newer, from the modern era, and defensive in nature. And guess what? They turned those into parking spaces as well. Remember when the late 20th century decided that everything should be a parking space? I do. Then the 21st century showed up and was like, yeah, this is fine. Be that as it may, at least it gives you a good impression of the dimensions of this kind of fortification, as well as the strength of the earthworks. Unlike medieval fortifications, these are all about resisting and enabling cannon fire. It's why they are so low and wide. It also determined their shape, which is, basically, polygonal. This was done in order to avoid any potential weak spots and force any attacker into overlapping fields of fire. Here you can see how far out I was at this point. Can you see the two church towers in the distance? The one to the right is from the cathedral. But now it was time to head back towards Old Town again. Basically I rounded this forward defensive network and moved back towards the river on the other side. However, I did not cross yet, for there was one more thing I wanted to see before doing so. Which was this synagogue. The first one I saw on this trip. She sure set a high bar. I'm very fond of the oriental style they went for here. I think it looks pretty amazing. I've seen quite a number of them since, but this one remains my favorite. Back in Old Town, I took a look at this church with the most peculiar facade. Although it is more of a porch, I guess. Or a foyer. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments. To me, it almost seems like they could not decide between a Romanesque arch and a Gothic one, so they decided to have both at the same time. Round as well as pointy. I sure like it. All the rest of the building is far less extravagant. Sadly, she was closed, so this was all I got to see before moving on. They say Christianity is a fate in decline. Whatever that's true or not, Besançon sure gives that impression, with some of its former churches now dedicated to a purpose that is entirely different. This, for example, seems to have been one as well. Now it appears to be a library. At least one I would like to visit one day, that's for sure. I didn't take the same way back in that I took moving outwards, so I got to see a bit more of the town. Like this corner here. And this cat cafe. If you ever happen to find yourself here, you know where to go. I passed the cathedral soon enough and made my way up to the citadel. You sure have a great view from up there. The tower visible in the foreground is, of course, from the cathedral. That aside, the old town of Besançon is quite uniform. The large church, just across the river, is one of the few buildings to stand out. You can find it in the left half of the picture. Now that you know about them, you can also spot the defenses we explored. It's quite easy, since it is the only park-like area within the city to have a considerable size. Those defenses, along with the river, make for a physical separation between Old Town and the newer quarters, and are, most likely, at least in part, what allowed Besançon to preserve much of its charm and heritage. But back to the citadel. This is the main gate. But before we enter, here's another clip for you. Of course, the best way to get an overview of a citadel and its precise shape is an aerial view, or a map, like this one. As you can see, the fortress pretty much follows the shape of the hill it is located on, making it a rough approximation to a longish rectangle. You probably expect to find a museum in there, and you are right. There are, in fact, several. However, if you don't mind, I will show you something different instead. Like this guy. Or these fellows. My apologies for the bad quality. Unfortunately, my old phone did not have any kind of zoom that was actually decent, and these critters were not exactly close. Here's yet another animal for you. This one even comes with horns. And, just in case you have not figured it out yet, yes, they turned part of the citadel into an animal park, which makes for a welcome change. Of course, the structure itself alone is worth a visit, but we'll wrap it up here. For one, we just saw the citadel of Belfort up close, and for another, there was still something I wanted to see that had closing times. It was about 1415 hours by now, and I needed to get there first too. This next site was not close by, therefore I intended to drive. Meaning I also needed to get back to my car. All these little things tend to add up and might cause you to miss out on something if you are not careful. Fortunately, there was a way back down, leading pretty much into the direction I needed to go. What you can see here is the battery tower we passed on our way in, by the way. This staircase seemed to be the quickest way to leave the hilltop, and from the looks of it, someone allowed to walk his dog all over it before the concrete had dried. At this point I was almost back at the level of the river when I took a last look back. It is truly astonishing how much of a difference even a small change in altitude can make, as seeing this fortress from the ground hides a lot of it due to perspective. I was not aware of it when I passed it on my way in, but the path I took made me reach ground level exactly behind the city gate, which was pretty much perfect. All that was left to do now was to follow the same straight road I had taken on my way in, and I made it back to my car in record time. And here we are, at the last site for the first day of my road trip to explore the French southeast. Or second to last, to be more precise, for, technically speaking, there was still one more. However, this one was intended to be purely optional to begin with, meaning the pressure was off. With this being a very recent building, hence the location well outside the city center, the reason for my interest was all about style, which is Roman Byzantine. Although you have to make it Neo-Roman Byzantine in this case. Not only do I find it appealing, it is also quite rare. To my knowledge, this is the closest one in relation to my hometown. Naturally, I jumped at the chance to pay it a visit as soon as I learned about it. I felt a real sense of relief when I arrived and found the gate open, for with things like this you can never be entirely certain until you are actually there. Be it as it may, not only was the building accessible to a reasonable degree, I also had it all to myself, which was a welcome change. And since I happened to be that lucky, I decided to share a couple more pictures with you than I did with the last ones. As far as the Roman Byzantine style is concerned, it usually is quite primal. Massive walls and pillars of simple shape and relatively short. Round arched small windows resulting in a dark interior in many cases. A tendency for cupolas as well as rich interior decoration. But it can also be modest or fall somewhere in between. And here we are, bringing this day to a close with a visit to the Besançon cemetery that happened to be right next to the church. One of them at the very least, since many cities tend to have several. After a busy day encountering many people, a visit to a cemetery is a good idea to get away from it all, for they are usually hardly frequented, very quiet, park-like areas. However, in contrast to parks, people you run into at a cemetery somehow understand to behave decent. Which is kind of funny to me. Because if they can manage to do that in this particular environment, I guess that means they could, at least in theory, do that anywhere and just don't bother to do so under regular circumstances. You can call that my social commentary for the day. More will sneak in over time, I'm sure. Getting back to the graveyard at hand. As far as the terrain is concerned, this one is a bit plain. There are neither hills nor trees, but I still enjoy looking at the tombstones, preferring, just like with churches, the older ones. Despite the cemetery itself as an aerial being basically identical to the ones in my home country, there is still one major difference that stands out to me. Evidently the French have, or at the very least used to have, better taste than the Germans. For, while the installations may be quite close, the individual tombs are much more sophisticated, featuring grander, more elaborate and, well, simply much more creative works. Small chapels and crypts, many of which are equipped with stained glass windows, are commonplace. Of course there's no need to take my word for it. Judge for yourself. Since this concludes our visit to Besançon, I will leave you alone with these thoughts, to do as you please. My next location was just over an hour away and I reached it without any incident. Arriving there, the first thing I did was to refuel and check into my hotel before getting my hands on a decent meal. With that being done, I turned in for the night, for my journey had just begun and I needed some rest before starting to explore this next city, which was notably larger, called Dijon.